Welcome to the Church Answers podcast with Jess Rayner. I'm Thom Rayner, and we're going to talk about something that hardly ever gets talked about in podcasts I've listened to. Why are the pianists and the organists the two most commonly paid positions in the church? Jess, I was working with the pastor 3 weeks ago. There are three paid positions in the church: hymn, organist, and pianist. They just gave him a pay cut, and the organist makes more.
Oh, dear.
I said, run, don't walk.
Yeah. Oh, dear.
Oh, man. Well, let's talk about that. And let's talk about the Church Answers podcast, sponsored by Cheney and Associates, the accounting firm for the church. You've already heard that on the bumper, so I'm not going to repeat a lot of it, but visit our friends at CheneyAssociates.com. Get your church set up for their bookkeeping, for their accounting. They are really doing an incredible job. Over 1,100 churches. That's all they do is churches. They do it well. All right, Jess, we're going to talk about something that really hadn't been that much a part of your life. I guess it has when I was a pastor. Mm-hmm. And every one of our, well, not every one of our churches, but the first church, the Church of First Merle, Hopewell, did not have an organist, and we didn't have an organ. We really didn't have a pianist, even though she was there. And
oh, dear.
You weren't
two
even,
oh dears already.
Yeah. You weren't even born when I started as a pastor in that church. I started in 1984, and you came into the world in 1985. So it was technically your first church, but I know you don't remember anything about that little country church. Then the second one, we got an organ and we got a pianist in there on each side of the pastor, just like it. And third one, yes. Fourth one, yes. All of the above. Okay. But by the time we got to the third one, though, the organist didn't always show up. So that's another story to itself. You said something pre-recording that I think is fascinating about why the organist and the pianist are often the paid position, and a lot of other positions aren't, particularly musical positions, but other positions are not. They're volunteer. Tell me.
Yeah, you put your money to where it's most important to you. It's what you emphasize as a church. And so we're talking about pianist and organist here. More than likely, based off even what you were saying before, that these maybe are more traditional style worship churches, and they are going to pay the pianist or organist because they value that and they emphasize that. And that's also where you want your quality to be. So wherever you pay, even if it's a more, for lack of better words, a contemporary church, you may pay a particular part of that worship because you want that to be emphasized and you want that to be its highest quality. You may maybe not remember this, but early on at the church at Spring Hill, we actually paid someone to run our sound. We didn't have anyone paid on stage. We had someone paid to run our sound because we didn't have anyone in the church that had enough capability to run it well. And so when I say sound, I'm talking about our soundboard.
Yes.
And so
I vaguely remember that.
Yeah. So for a season there, until we could train up some new volunteers, we paid that because we felt like that was a point of emphasis in our church, especially when it comes to our worship service, that we wanted the best mix of our sound quality. And so why are the pianists and organists paid? It's what they value. It's what they emphasize. It's who they are as a church.
I think you're partially right. I just don't think you're fully right.
Okay. I'll accept that.
Well, the partial right is your statement is correct. You pay for what you value. The reasons for the value are not always just we like traditional music. The reasons for it are it is a deep-seated tradition, not the music, but the two positions. The organist was the most in-demand position from the 19th century to the mid-20th century, particularly in more formal churches, but in informal as well. The organists and the type of organs they had in the church were much more complex than the piano. And so you had why did you pay your sound person? Yes, it's something you gave a priority, but the reason you paid is because you had no one else to do it.
Right.
And you had to pay someone. Same thing in churches. If they wanted an organist, they basically had to pay for it because those people could not be found very much. There's a lot more keys on most organs. It's a lot more complicated, more pedals on the type of organs that were there. And I'm not a musician, but that's part of the history, particularly of many European churches, but of the American church as well. And so in order to have an organist, which was an indication you had a professional musician in your church, that was the indication, you had to pay them. But many churches also had pianists, and they could not, to double negative it, not pay them. So
Okay.
the pianist rode the coattails of the organist to get paid. Now, why do you think I even created this podcast? Just because I was looking for content and couldn't find anything else? I mean, you never asked me, well, why are we doing this one? Why did I create content for that?
I thought it, but I didn't ask it.
The reason is it's coming up in a lot of church budgets. I'm doing consultations and I'm looking at allocation of funds. And listen, if you're a church organist, forgive me for what I'm about to say, but because I'm not anti-organist, so I just want you to hear that. But I've looked at a number of statements, financial statements of churches, budgets of churches, where the attendance is 50, 60, 70. And the amount that they pay for an organist for their size church is so disproportionate to the whole budget. And now with the median size of a church down to around 50 to 55, that's a lot of churches that are expending funds there.
Right.
And they've always done it that way.
And it can be disruptive if you don't.
There's the other point. Yeah, because every organist has a cousin, husband, wife, somebody who is going to pitch fit if you don't have the organist anymore. The reason I did this is because it's coming up in consultations, especially on the normative size church. And by that, I mean those churches that are smaller. And, I'm asking the question, why y'all paying this for an organist compared to the budget of the whole church? And the response is, I don't want to get fired.
It's become a sacred cow.
It has become a definite sacred cow. There's a rich history to the organist and the pianist, more the organist. I had to do some research on this, not necessarily for this podcast, but to find out what was going on in the history of the American church. Yes, a lot of it is stylistic, because what does the organist represent? And you said it, usually it represents hymnody. It usually represents the traditional music. But that wasn't the only reason. The primary reason was it was the instrument that carried the sway for a century and a half in the United States. And if you didn't have an organist, you just didn't have a musician.
So there could be one other potential point of this is that if that is a major budget item, that it could be, I'm not saying it's for all churches that have organists, it could be that they're living in the past as well.
Could be. But we have to be careful.
Right.
There's some churches that have organists that have a more higher form of church, a more traditional form of church, and they do it well.
Right. 100%. I didn't say all. I was just saying the potential could be that, one, we can't do it because of sacred cow. It could be, though, that we want to continue to live in the past and not really move toward the future.
Right.
Could be.
And when you start looking at sacred cows, we could go down all kind of paths on that. But when you start looking at sacred cows, you're looking at things that you ask the question, why do we do what we do? And you don't have a good answer.
Yep.
And that may be the case here. So if you have an organist and a pianist and you're paying them, I just want you to simply ask why.
Yeah.
And if you have a good answer for it, good. Now, if you say we shouldn't, but it is such an issue of contention that it's going to cause all kind of division within the church, I get that. Maybe it's not, I got a metaphor, another metaphor, not a hill worth dying on.
Yeah.
So.
And, especially as this podcast is coming out, that's a great question to ask for your entire budget. Yeah. That's something we do is we look at each of our not line items, but our major categories and go, why are we spending money here? Does this make sense? Is there a better use of this? And so take that principle and apply it to your whole budget as you're looking at, as we enter budget season in church life.
You're talking about the zero-based budget where you don't assume that anything should be paid for the next year that you've paid this past year. Good word. Yep. Well, now you, the listener or viewer at YouTube, you are wondering, why is Thom Rainer talking about organists and pianists? Has he just run out of content? After all these years, he no longer has any content. So many books, articles, podcasts. He's done. No, it's because I'm seeing it in budgets.
If you write the book I Am an Organist, that's it. You're done. You're done.
Okay.
Calling it quits.
I got it. Thank you as always for being a part of the Church Answers podcast. See you later.